My name is Miiraa and I am the person behind Miiraa.handmade. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can sew a flowy, beautiful maxi skirt. I really love this pattern because it is very beginner friendly. It basically only consists of squares that you have to sew together. So no matter your skill level, you'll be able to sew this pattern. So this YouTube tutorial comes with a pattern, but the best part about it is that it is completely free. So all you have to do is download the sewing pattern and then just follow the tutorial, and that's all you need. When you look at the information on the pattern, you will see that there are only 3 sizes that you can choose from, and that's because everything is very size adjustable. So there is only a small, a medium and a large, but you can adjust everything so that it fits perfectly to your measurements. So then there's also 3 lengths, so no matter how tall you are, you will find something that fits for you. I mentioned at the start that this is my first ever YouTube sewing tutorial, so please cut me some slack. It was really hard for me at first to figure out how to shoot different angles so that I can make sure that you can see everything that I do and follow the tutorial. But I think that in the end, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and I think that you'll be able to follow it and you'll be able to make really beautiful skirts. And with that being said, let's start sewing. So now I'm going to cut out my fabric pieces, and they're all labeled so you will know how many of each piece you will have to cut. Alright, so now I have cut out all the pieces and I will now sew all the tiers together. So this here is the first tier, and first we have to check which side is the good and which one's the bad side, because we want the good sides facing each other. Alright, so quick pause here from Future Samira. You might be wondering why I'm suddenly starting to talk about double-lined fabric or lined fabric. Sometimes you have to line a fabric, and that basically just means that there are 2 layers attached to each other, an outer fabric and a lining. And the outer fabric is the pretty one that you can see on the outside, and the lining sits on the inside. It makes the skirt less see-through and a bit more structured. So when I'm cutting and sewing, I treat these 2 layers as one. I pin them together and I sew them together at the same time. If you're using just a single layer of fabric, don't worry, you can just follow along the tutorial exactly the same way. Okay, let's continue. So here you can see how it's double layered. So we have, just like with the bottom layer, I just pinned it right sides together. And then on top of it, I just added the white lining. You can use whatever color you want for the lining. I wanted to use a rose like here, but they didn't have it in the fabric store, so I went for something neutral. So that's why I've got white, but yeah, use whatever you want. But when it's double lined, it looks like this. And now, just as we would have, or as we're gonna do with this layer here, we're just gonna sew this side and this side together. And we do that for all 3 panels. Here you can see that's my top layer or my top tier. Here I've got it lined as well. So we're gonna go like this and this. And same for the bottom one, just like this. Okay, so now we've sewn all our pieces together, and the next step will be to iron the seams open. So what I mean by that is you have your seam here, and then you're just going to fold it up like that. Don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can see it. And then you're just going to iron all the way along the seam. What that does is it makes it look a lot nicer from the outside. So right now it's a bit all bunched up, but once it's ironed open and flat, it'll look really crisp. And then once we've done that, we're gonna overlock the seam so that it doesn't fray in the wash. Okay, so now that we've pressed the seams, you should have 3 tubes like this. This is the bottom tier, so this is the largest. And now we've pressed the seams so it looks somewhat like this if you've done it correctly. But now we can't just leave it like that, because the fabric, you can already see it starting to happen here. It's going to fray, and it'll fray even more if you wash it or if you just keep wearing it. So what we have to do is finish the seams, and we're going to do, well, I'm going to do it by overlocking the seams. If you have an overlock machine, like, you can use your overlock or serger. If you don't have one, don't worry, you can just use a zigzag stitch. So what you would do is just sew a zigzag stitch out here in the seam allowance, very close to the edge of the fabric. Okay, so now these are our panels, and as you can see, they're all a different length or width, basically. So how can we sew them together? Because that's what we've got to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a gathering stitch on this side and on this side. And what that does is it gathers the fabric together at the top seam here, and it'll be the same length as the bottom seam of the tier above, and then we can sew it together. So now I'm going to show you how you can sew this gathering stitch. Let's just take the middle tier, and we're going to have to fit it to the top tier. So we have a 1 centimeter seam allowance on these 2 parts as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew a straight stitch along here, but we're going to set our stitch length to the longest length, and then we're going to sew 2 straight stitches, one about 1/2 centimeter from the edge, so it's going to be within the seam allowance, and one about 1.5 centimeters from the edge, so it's going to be outside the seam allowance. But it doesn't matter, because in the end we're going to undo those 2 rows of stitches, but I'm going to show you exactly how to do it when we get to it. So now what you're going to do is you're going to change your stitch length to the longest setting. So as you can see, I've put some pins in just because here I've got the outer fabric and the lining fabric, and I want to make sure that the stitch goes through the lining and the outer fabric. Then we're going to open it up like this, and then it's very important that you only sew the stitch through 2 layers of fabric for the tiers with the lining fabric, and only through 1 layer of fabric for the tiers without lining fabric. And we're going to start about 1 to 2 centimeters away from the middle here. So to sew a gathering stitch, it's very important that you have long tails of the top and the bottom thread. So if you have a machine with an automatic thread cutter like mine, usually you won't have the bottom thread coming out here. So in that case, what I like to do is I just take a scrap piece of fabric, I just sew a few stitches, needle up, and then I don't use the thread cutter. Then I put my presser foot up and I pull out both threads until I have a fairly long tail, and then I just cut it off. If you don't have an automatic thread cutter, you should be able to just pull out your bottom thread. Have your tails at the back so you can wrap them. Feed the fabric underneath, Make sure you only catch 2 layers for tees with lining fabric, and for tees without lining fabric only 1 layer. And then start not right on the thread that you just stitched before, but start maybe 1 to 2 centimeters away from it. And now we're not going to do a 1 centimeter seam allowance, but we're actually going to sew within that 1 centimeter seam allowance, so about half a centimeter away from the edge of the fabric. Hold on to your tails and do not backstitch. So holding on just so it doesn't pull the thread under. And if you've sewn a few stitches, you can let go and then sew that first line. And then, very important, don't sew right over the next line of stitches, but stop a few centimeters away from it. And then don't use your thread cutter if you have one, but again, needle up, press a foot up, and then pull it away so you have long tails. Again, needle up, press a foot up, leave long tails. And now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the fabric. So now we have our top panel and we have our middle panel, and here you see the gathering stitches, 2 rows, and we want to make this one fit onto this one. So what I like to do first is we're going to take this and we're going to find the middle. So you just take both of these seams, you put them on top, and then that way you can find the middle of both panels, and then you can put a pin in it, or you can use your tiny scissors and snip. I recommend putting a pin in it because otherwise you might snip through the gathering stitches. So now I know this is the middle. And then I'm just going to flip the top panel here, right side out, because that's how we're going to need it when we're going to sew it. And then you're going to do the same thing here as well. Put the seams together, like so, and find the middle. So now we have the middle of both of them. Put it down, the pins, the edge with the pins facing upwards, and then you're just going to feed it inside of the bottom, or the inside of the middle layer. Doesn't have to be perfect at all, it just needs to be inside. Just, yeah, doesn't matter if it's messy. And then you have the pin marking the middle here, and you have the pin marking the middle here. And now we're going to put that on top of one another. So you can take one pin marking the middle out. And now we're just going to pin the two together like that. And then we're going to turn it around, and I like to do the same thing on the other side as well. You could do that later as well, but I like to just do it all at the same time. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to make sure everything fits. And then we're going to pin through all the layers. So now we have marked the middle. Now you can turn it towards you or away from you. It doesn't really matter at this point. And now I'm going to show you how you can gather. So I think you can see it well enough to follow. So there were these thread tails that I was talking about before, and they're very important now. So just get the ones from the top to stitch closer to the edge, and then you don't really need the top thread, but you need the bottom thread. Take the bottom thread of both rows. Well, it's a bit hard because there's a bit of tail chaos here, because we also have all the thread tails from the other side, but I'm just going to put the top tails here in the middle of the fabric, so this is all from the other side. And here now I'm holding on to the bottom tails, like the bobbin tails of these two rows of gathering. And now that I'm holding on to them, I'm just holding on with one hand, and then I'm gently just pushing the fabric on the inside, like towards the middle, or pulling on the top thread. It's a bit of both, and you have to be careful here so that you don't rip both threads, or like don't rip any of the threads really. Just use, you know, your intuition, and then keep pulling, and then you can see your fabric gathers already, and then just kind of push the gathers towards the middle a little bit, and then keep repeating this. And it takes a bit of figuring out if you're doing it the first time, so don't worry about it. Take your time. And now, as you can see, I've already gathered too much, because your goal is that this seam here will align with this one here. So if you've gathered too much, don't worry. It can be undone really easily. You just do it like that. You just push the gathers outside. So now we're going to add some more gathers. Just, yeah, when the edge here, like that seam here, when that aligns with the seam on the inside here, I hope you can see it. So I want this seam to align with this seam. That's when you've gathered enough. So what you can do is actually put a pin in it. So make sure both seams are aligned perfectly, like so. And then I like to put my pin right through both seams. So and now what you can do is push the gathers around until it's very even and until you're happy with it. So, and now if you stretch it, you can see it fits perfectly. So I like to just put some temporary pins in it. I say temporary because when you've gathered the other side as well, you might have to adjust the gathers a little bit because of the pin marking the middle. We haven't got any gathers here in the middle, and that doesn't look very nice because that's like smack bang in the middle of your garment, so it's going to be very visible. But it's just how I like to do it. You don't have to use the temporary pins. You can pin everything down when you've gathered the other side as well. It's just how I like to do it. So now we're going to be doing the exact same thing on the other side. So these are the top thread tails. We don't need them. I'm just going to put them in the middle, and then we're going to get both tail ends of the bobbin thread, put the other ones aside, and then keep pulling and pushing towards the center. And now when you lift it up, you can see it pretty much fits. The longer end now fits on the shorter top panel. So now I like to put in a temporary pin here. And then we're going to undo the middle and just move the gathers around so that the middle is gathered nicely as well. And then just look at everything and make sure that there's an even amount of gathers distributed along the whole seam or the whole edge. If you're happy with it, you can then put some more needles in, and with gathering, I think there's no such thing as too many pins. So make sure with the lining here that it's lined up really nicely, because when you sew this permanent stitch, you want to be able to catch both the main fabric and the lining fabric. So now this is what this side looks like, and just to give you an idea, this is what gathering does, right? So now this fits perfectly onto the shorter layer, whereas up here, the other side we haven't gathered yet, you've got all of this gaping going on. So now we're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. So now I've pinned both sides, and this is what it looks like now. So now you're going to sew your permanent stitch, and you're just going to sew all the way around in one go, and you're going to sew in between the two lines of gathering stitches. So you're going to sew in between here, Before you start sewing, be sure to set your stitch length back to what it was before. So for me it is 2.8. And just get all the threads out of the way. So now that we've sewn all around and we're happy with it, we're going to take out the gathering stitches. Now, if you're lucky, you can just pull on them and they will come out. But if you're unlucky like me, your thread snaps and you're going to have to unpick it. So now that I've unpicked everything, it took me way too long. I'm going to go over to my iron and I'm going to iron open the seams like we did before, and then I'm going to overlock it. So as you can see, the seams are pressed open, and now I'm just going to overlock this here. Okay, so now I've sewn all around, and with your sewing machine you can just back stitch and that will secure the stitch, but with your overlock you can't do that. So there's multiple ways you can secure your stitch. What I like to do is I have a big needle like that, and then I go through, let me just make sure that you can see it. I push the needle through my overlock stitches and I go through, I just make sure that I catch about probably like 2 centimeters. That's usually enough. And then I've pushed it through, and then I just cut off the excess, and then once I've pushed it through, I thread the end through my needle, and it's usually quite easy because the needle is so big, and then I just pull it through and I cut off the rest, and that's it. So now we've sewn all around, and now when we turn it, this is what it looks like. So this is the top and the middle tier, and now we're going to do the exact same thing for the bottom tier, and then all that's left to do is create a tunnel for the elastic and hem the bottom. So now we have the bottom tier, and this one isn't lined, so you can see there's only one layer of fabric. And again, we're going to sew 2 rows of gathering stitches, stitch length to the longest setting, and one's about 0.5 centimeter away from the edge and the other one's 1 centimeter in from the other stitch, so about 1.5 centimeters from the edge. Now that we've sewn the 2 rows of gathering stitches on the top, the bottom tier, we're going to repeat all the steps we did before. So first, we're going to look for the middle. And then we're going to look for the middle in the middle tier as well. And then, like last time, right sides together, we're gonna feed it through. So this is my right side on this panel here, and this is the right side on the middle tier. So now what we're going to do is we're going to feed it through like that. Oh, nearly lost the middle pin. And now we're going to connect the middle. And now we start gathering. I have used a different thread now, one that matches the fabric, so it's a lot harder for you to see, but we're basically just doing the exact same thing as we did before. So this is what it looks like so far. I've finished all the panels, sewn together and overlocked everything, and now all that's left to do is fold down a tunnel up here like I did, like you can see here, and then I will thread the elastic through, and then after that I will hem the bottom, and then it's finished. So I have to say I'm pretty happy, and I hope you will have just as much fun with it as I did. Alright, so now we have the skirt left side out, and this is the top panel, and we're gonna have to create a tunnel for the elastic so we can thread the elastic through. And sometimes you see people attach a waistband, but in this case I like to do something that's much easier, and that's just folding it down like that. And then we're going to sew here, leave a little gap, and then you have a perfect tunnel. But here we have the unfinished edge. So in order to finish that edge, there's two possibilities that you have. You can either start by folding it in maybe 1 centimeter all the way around, and then fold that. And then when you sew here, it's all hidden. Or what you can do is also, if you have an overlock machine, or alternatively you can just zigzag stitch, you can overlock or zigzag the top here, and then it's finished as well. And then you can just fold it down like that and it'll be finished. In my opinion, it doesn't look as pretty, but it's up to you. Personally, what I like to do is I like to overlock it first and then still fold it in, just because for me, it just always gives me the cleanest finish. So that's what I'm going to be doing. All right, so now you can see I have overlocked the top edge here. And now what I'm going to do is, you could now just fold it down like this and then sew over here, but you would see the overlock, and I don't like that. So I'm just going to fold it in just along the overlocked edge, because then when I fold it again, it's neatly hidden. And by folding in, I mean you're going to fold it, and then to set it in place, you're also going to press it. By pressing, I mean iron. So now that that's done, you're going to have to create the tunnel, and you need to make sure that the tunnel is wide enough so that your fabric fits through. So my suggestion is make the tunnel 1 to 1.5 centimeters wider than your elastic. So my elastic is 2.5 centimeters. So I will make my tunnel somewhere between 3.5 and 4 centimeters. So to create the tunnel, you can't just measure down the amount of centimeters that you want your tunnel to be, because then when you fold it, it's only going to be half. So let's say I want to make my tunnel 3.75 centimeters. So then I'm gonna have to double that measurement, so that's gonna be 7.5, and then I will measure down 7.5 centimeter, and from the top edge here, and I'm gonna mark that point. And then I will continue measuring all around, so I have the measurements. So now that I've measured everything, I can fold it down and pin it in place. So I'm gonna start folding, and I will put in a pin. And to get a really crisp tunnel, I will go over it once with my iron. So now we're gonna sew along here, along the edge, pretty close to the edge, so not our usual 1 centimeter seam allowance, maybe half a centimeter, but get as close as you can get while still catching the whole edge. And very important, leave a gap of about, I would say at least, leave a gap of at least 3 to 5 centimeters. If you're new to this and you're not used to this process, I suggest putting in 2 pins, like maybe one here and one here, to remind you that you have to sew this way all around and then stop here, because that's where we're going to thread through the elastic. So as you can see, here's the opening. So now to get the right length of your elastic, you can either just measure your waist, or if you don't want your skirt to sit on your waist, if you want to sit it lower, just measure around the point where you want it to sit. But I want mine on my waist, so I can either take my waist measurement, and don't breathe in and then don't breathe again. Have it realistic, because that's what we're going to be wearing and it should be comfortable, but obviously not too loose because it is elastic after all. So you can either do that and then take your waist measurement, and I would suggest maybe subtracting 1 to 2 centimeters from that, and that's the length that you're going to cut. Or alternatively, you can just take your elastic and wrap it around the point where you want your skirt to sit, and then you can also try out with the tension of it. So for me, I'm probably gonna cut it like that. So I will cut this off, and this is gonna be my elastic. So now to thread the elastic through, you're going to need a safety pin, and then just stick that through one end of your elastic. Take the skirt, and then in the opening, thread the elastic in, and then just keep pulling it through with the safety pin. So now, have a feel around the whole thing one more time, just to make sure you didn't twist the elastic. And then what I like to do is I like to secure them together. Hold on to them so it doesn't go back into the tunnel and vanish in the depth of the skirt. And then just adjust the elastic. Basically just have a fiddle around with it. And then take the safety pin, or just use a normal pin, and secure it out here. And then try on your skirt to make sure that you like how the elastic sits. If you're happy with it, you can take both tails of the elastic. Take out the safety pin, but hold on to the elastic. I made a bit of a mess, so I'm going to cut that off. Then have them overlap. And just stick a needle in. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew the elastic together. So I like to use a zigzag stitch for that. Pull out your elastic a little bit so you have a bit of room to work with it. And then just start sewing it together. And when you sew it together, make sure you don't stretch it. What I like to do is I like to sew a box. So now I'm going to go over it like this and then pivot down. And then now I'm just going to sew a backward stitch. Then make sure everything's really snug in place. You can go over it a few more times. I usually do that because I'm paranoid. And now you can just pull on it and it is fed back through the tunnel. And now all that's left to do is just finish this gap here. So I'm going to go back to a straight stitch, my usual stitch length. And then now you need to stretch the fabric a little bit so that the elastic is stretched and your fabric is not all bunched up for closing the gap. So now there's two ways you can go about finishing the waistband. You can either, to keep it in place, sew another row of stitches around here in the middle and you have to stretch it the whole way. Or if you don't like the look of that, you could also, just to make sure that the elastic doesn't twist, you could just sew a straight stitch down here, basically stitch in the ditch, which means you're just going to sew exactly where the seam is, and then do it on this side here as well. So that's up to you, depends which look you prefer. And now the audio has stopped working, so I'm just doing a voiceover. Basically, the next step is to sew the hem, and what you can see here is that I'm just overlocking the hem, like just the bottom of the skirt. I'm overlocking it all around in one go. Now, you don't have to do that. I'm just doing it this way because I miscalculated when I made a prototype and the skirt was very short. Well, it's still long, it's a maxi skirt, but it's too short for me to add a proper hem. So I had to just overlock the bottom and then just fold up the overlocked part once and sew over it, and that's my makeshift hem. But I'm going to show you another way how you can sew a proper hem in just a minute. And now here you can see me just fold up the overlocked part and then ironing over it. And then already sitting at my sewing machine, I just fold up the already folded up part once more. And then I sew over it along the whole hem, and that's basically just how I made my hem. Alright, now here I'm showing you how you can make a hem without overlocking the bottom of your skirt. So What you need is the measurement from the bottom of your fabric to where you want the finished skirt to end. So let's say you want your skirt to be 4 centimeters shorter when it's finished than it is when there's no hem on it yet. So then you're going to measure these 4 centimeters up from the bottom of the fabric and you mark that. And then once that's done, you need to take half of that measurement, so that will be 2 centimeters, and you're going to measure up from the line of the 4 centimeters that you measured before. And then what you're going to do is you fold up your fabric to the 4 centimeter line and then you iron over it to set the crease. And then once you've done that, you're going to fold up your fabric once again to the 2 centimeter line. And then you will see that everything fits perfectly, and then you can just sew along the top. And that's it, you're finished. I hope that you had fun sewing your own skirt and that it turned out beautifully. And if you did like the tutorial, I would love to see your creations. So if you take any pictures, please send them to me, or you can also tag me. And yeah, I would love to see how your creations turned out. If there are any unanswered questions about the sewing pattern, please let me know in the comments and I will answer them the best I can. And I will see you next time.